morning light crept through Emma's diner's grimy windows onto worn linoleum. At the head of the table, Gustav sat rigidly, scarred hands gripping a mug of weak coffee. His clear eyes swept over familiar, hardened faces, faces unaware of the truth he was about to reveal. "This butcher of Ramada thing isn't what it seems," he said steadily. "I'll explain everything." Trevor narrowed his eyes. Nordberg folded his arms. Harrison ran a hand through his unwashed hair, and Anthony tapped a silent code on the table. Bobby Valente watched intently between them. "I was a Green Beret," Gustav continued flatly. "I worked undercover with an infantry unit under investigation." Outside, a walker shuffled past on cracked asphalt. "In Ramada, I had proof this unit massacred a village, women, children, everyone, even the fucking goats. But before I could lodge my findings, we were ambushed. Command denied my extraction, so I fought alone for 3 hours after all my buddies were killed." His jaw tightened. "Then they covered it up, buried the report and the truth along with my men." Silence stretched taut as Trevor recalled the pain of abandonment, of watching everything collapse while the world moved on. "You saved my life at Blue Ridge. Whatever you did before," Trevor began. "Doesn't matter," Nordberg interjected. "We all have ghosts." Mr. Harper, a gaunt man with too many years in his eyes, pushed back from the table. "Sun's climbing. Chuck, the missus and I need to move if we're to hit those woods by White Path." Mrs. Harper nodded, checking the hunting knife at her belt, while quiet Chuck shouldered a pack by the door. "Good hunting," Bobby called. Turning to Trevor, he added, "We should head out too if we want to hit Blue Ridge and retrieve our gear before dark." Trevor nodded, draining the last of his coffee. "Everything but Archer's horse, no room for it." Archer, leaning against the counter, gave a curt nod. The horse was a luxury they couldn't afford now that the diner served as their new, more defensible refuge with clear sight lines and escape routes. The group dispersed with the urgency of those used to constant motion and vigilance. Gustav stayed behind, staring into his coffee as if reading its murky prophecies. "You coming?" Trevor asked at the door. Gustav looked up, his eyes aged beyond his years. "Yeah." He stood, chair scraping the floor. "I'm coming." Outside, they loaded their weapons into a faded, rust-colored pickup truck. The engine sputtered to life, its roar harsh in the quiet morning. As they drove off, Trevor glanced back at the diner's worn sign, a brief refuge in a string of short-lived shelters in this dying world. The time before they were forced to move again, by the living or the undead, balanced between luck and brutality. 3 days of watching had left Anthony's eyes raw. He and Nordberg had taken turns hiding between a collapsed billboard and an abandoned gas station's roof, their only view of Twin Peaks Mall being across a weed-choked parking lot. They passed the time pissing into bottles and eating cold beans, a discomfort dwarfed by the scene unfolding below. Teenagers, tearful and trembling, being herded into a military transport truck. 4 guards at the west entrance, Nordberg whispered, 2 patrolling the perimeter, all armed. Anthony refocused his binoculars as the raiders moved with urgent familiarity, their weapons casually in hand. A sniper on the mall's roof occasionally tracked them, forcing Anthony and Nordberg into deeper shadow. "Look, 3 o'clock, Anthony hissed, while passing the binoculars. A man in a sharply contrasting charcoal suit emerged from the mall, clipboard in hand, speaking with a hulking raider whose face was split by a scar. "What the hell is the suit doing here?" Nordberg muttered. Before any answer could come, the suited man gestured toward the group of terrified teenagers. One girl, around 14, with matted hair, kept glancing over her shoulder, silently pleading for rescue. That's Darryl," Anthony breathed. Dr. Darryl Chesterton moved among the teens with clinical detachment, marking his clipboard before nodding at a guard who shoved another adolescent into the truck. "The friendly doctor from Sugar Hill," Nordberg said flatly, "not so friendly now." Only weeks earlier, they'd rescued Chesterton from a clinic besieged by walkers, grateful for his help. Now he was a butcher-like overseer among captives. Beside the raider leader, 2 bodyguards clutched semi-automatic rifles, fingers resting near the triggers. A nearby 4x4 with a mounted .50 caliber machine gun completed the suited man and Dr. Chesterton's heavily armed entourage. 3 days, same routine, Anthony noted in a water-stained pad. They gather, process, and ship them out, but where? Nordberg's attention was drawn to two cages near the mall's entrance. One was empty. In the other, a juvenile walker, a fast, frenzied figure with blazing, purposeful eyes, hammered persistently against the bars. "I've seen teenage walkers before, but nothing like this," Anthony whispered. The walker crashed against its enclosure with renewed ferocity. A guard rushed over and struck the cage with the butt of his rifle, only for the creature to lunge, snapping at his provoked fingers. After the last teenager was loaded into the truck, a girl who hesitated before being roughly pushed inside, the suited man, Chesterton, and the raider leader shook hands in a grim mimicry of normalcy. Where are they taking these kids, and who are these people? Government, military? Anthony wondered aloud. The raiders are one thing, but this is a well-organized, heavily armed group. What the fuck is going on? The why scares me more than the who or where, Nordberg replied. Let's move. Emma's diner is over an hour away by foot, even if we push it. They descended the roof using a mold-slick maintenance ladder. The journey back promised danger, exposed roads, lurking walkers, and possibly worse, but they now held vital intelligence, a chance to strike back against the corrupt deal inside Twin Peaks Mall. As they made their way through the woods parallel to the highway, Anthony cast one last glance back. The military truck pulled away, carrying its human cargo to an uncertain fate, while the juvenile walker continued thrashing in its cage as darkness fell. Upon their return, Emma's diner was transformed. Tables lined against windows served as barricades, plywood-covered improvised gun ports, and tin can tripwires fenced the parking lot. The Blue Ridge team had arrived with weapons and supplies. Harrison, Anthony, and Nordberg leaned over a hastily drawn paper map of Twin Peaks Mall, while Trevor meticulously cleaned his rifle. "Show us again," Trevor said to Anthony. "Every detail matters." Anthony pointed out that the raiders were oddly organized. Guards rotated every 4 hours, and 2 locations on the roof were actively manned. Nordberg noted their leader had 2 bodyguards carrying AR-15s, and mentioned a 4x4 carrying a mounted .50 caliber gun that had left with a military group handling the teenagers. Archer asked about the juvenile walker. Anthony's expression tightened as he explained it was different, faster and strangely aware, confined to a secure cage, one of 2 with the other now empty. The silence that followed was heavy. While they had seen their share of horrors, the deliberate roundup of teenagers was a new terror. "We hit them before sunrise tomorrow, quick, hard, and without mercy," Harrison declared. Carlos groaned from a booth, his head wrapped in blood-stained bandages from his head wound that still needed a day or 2 to heal. "He needs another day," Milton confirmed after checking his injuries. Trevor countered that every extra day could mean more kids taken or Toby ending up in that truck. Amy, holding Carlos's hand, shared in their quiet fear. Bobby reminded them, "Carlos is our best driver. We need him if we're hitting that place." Reluctantly, Trevor agreed to postpone the attack by 1 day for better preparation. While the extra time brought some relief, it also risked more losses. Harrison refocused on the map. "If we're waiting a day, let's adjust our approach." He reassigned roles. "Anthony, you're with me on the roof for the sniper. Trevor, come with us." As their planning shifted like chess pieces, the image of the juvenile walker haunted them, a grim omen of things they barely understood. As night fell, the survivors broke into smaller groups, checking lights and weapons by lamplight. Harrison field-stripped his rifle, its parts gleaming like wet bones. Trevor tested his knife, drawing a thin line of blood that he wiped off his jeans. Archer counted his crossbow bolts while running silent mental calculations. From his makeshift bed, Carlos insisted, "I'll be ready, tomorrow or the next day." A quiet vow in a world where hope was as valuable as ammunition. Outside, a lone walker stumbled past the diner, barely noticed amid a landscape of ghosts. Inside, the survivors continued their preparations with shared determination and private fears. "Get some sleep," Harrison ordered. "Tomorrow we finalize the plan. The day after, we end those bastards." They dispersed into corners and booths, their sleep fitful and haunted by visions of caged children and relentless walkers. In the darkest hours, Anthony lay awake, replaying the juvenile walker's movements and recalling odd details from the mall. A clinical efficiency in Dr. Chesterton's actions and the handshake of a suited man. Some horrors, he realized, didn't end with civilization's collapse. They simply thrived in its ruins. Day 4 arrived deceptively calm. Dawn spilled thin gold lines through the plywood-covered windows as the survivors quietly checked weapons and reviewed plans. In a corner booth, Carlos stirred, alert for the first time since his injury, and subtly gripped his cold pistol beneath his pillow. No one noticed, except Clint, who shot a wary glance seconds before the first bullet shattered the morning quiet. The report roared inside the diner. Clint staggered backward, a bloom of red spreading over his chest as Carlos fired shot after shot, 5 in total, with the last 3 fatally striking him. Clint collapsed between 2 tables. After a heavy beat of silence, chaos erupted. "Carlos, what the fuck?" Trevor shouted, ducking for cover while reaching for his weapon. Harrison charged at Carlos with murderous intent, but stopped when Bobby grabbed his arm. "Wait! Wait!" Amy's scream, a thin, high sound of anguish, cut through the confusion. She lunged at Clint's body, but Nordberg restrained her, even as she cried, "You killed him! You killed him!" until her words dissolved into sobs. Carlos sat calmly, pistol still in hand but lowered, his expression eerily tranquil. "He was sleeping with my wife and the bastard tried to kill me," he said steadily. "A man defends his honor." Gustav's tone left no room for argument. "Put the gun down, Carlos." With his own weapon raised and a clear shot, Gustav ensured Carlos complied, placing the pistol carefully on the table while his eyes fixed on a collapsed Amy. "How long have you known about her and Clint?" Trevor asked quietly. "About 3 to 4 weeks, Carlos replied. "I sensed something was off when that plane inexplicably landed in a field. I knew he was going to mess with me. I mean, look at her. Who wouldn't want her?" A bitter smile twisted his lips as he chuckled. Nordberg added, "Clint was a piece of shit, only alive because he was a pilot. Good riddance." Anthony checked Clint's pulse as a formality. "Yep, he's gone," he confirmed. "We need every fighter for the raid," Harrison said, voice tight with controlled fury. "You could have done this after the mall raid." Carlos's eyes hardened. "And what, give him another chance to shoot me in the back? I can still drive, I can still shoot. Nothing's changed." "Everything's changed," Bobby snapped, gesturing toward Amy's despondent form. "You think she'll come with us now?" Carlos glanced at his grieving wife, where regret and raw love mingled, then said, "She stays here. I go with you. Afterward, we'll see what happens." Trevor and Harrison exchanged silent glances. They were down a fighter, but Carlos was injured yet mobile and a skilled driver. Could they trust him not to jeopardize the mission? "We'll bury him later," Trevor decided flatly. "For now, stick to the plan." Carlos nodded, wincing as movement stirred his healing wound, his once steady hands trembling slightly now as he sank back onto the cushion. "Keep that gun," Harrison instructed Gustav, nodding to the pistol by Carlos. Gustav collected it and secured it at his waistband, determined to keep an eye on him. Bobby sighed. "I knew these people were a bad idea from the moment I saw that damn plane." Outside, walkers had gathered, decaying hands pressed against the reinforced windows, while hungry moans underscored the aftermath of human violence. Archer dispatched a walker with a crossbow bolt through the eye. "We've got company. More will come if these aren't cleared quickly," he murmured. Reality reasserted itself. A raid awaited, and children needed saving. The dead, both walking and freshly killed, could wait. But as the survivors returned to their grim preparations, trust grew even thinner, underscored by Amy's soft, relentless weeping, a stark reminder of how quickly everything can change. The mall's silhouette cut a jagged edge against the pre-dawn sky, a monument to a dead civilization now repurposed for cruelty. Bobby adjusted the putrid skin draped over his shoulders, the stench of the freshly donned walker flesh like a physical weight pressing against his senses. He'd found this a few days back, fresh then and still pliable, but putrid ever still. He'd preserved the hide with vinegar to mask his living scent. The team called it his walker suit, but that was too clean a term for this abomination he now wore. Still, if it got him inside undetected, he'd have worn the flesh of 10 walkers. Hell, he'd have worn his own mother's skin if that's what it took. He shambled forward, mimicking the disjointed gait of the dead. The trick wasn't in the costume, but in the movement, too purposeful, and the raiders would spot him immediately. Too erratic, and he might draw unwanted attention from the actual walkers that lingered at the mall's perimeter, drawn by the presence of the living inside. Harrison and Trevor lay prone on the roof of an abandoned office depot across the parking lot, their rifles trained on the mall's upper level. The homemade silencers, plastic bottles stuffed with steel wool and duct tape to the barrels, wouldn't do much for accuracy, but they might muffle the sound enough to buy them precious seconds before the alarm spread. Target acquired, Harrison whispered to Trevor. Wait for Bobby to reach position. Trevor adjusted his scope, centering the crosshairs on the raider sniper who paced the adjoining building's roof. The man moved with military precision, scanning the surrounding area with methodical sweeps. Sooner or later, he'd spot them. Everything depended on timing. Bobby advanced slowly toward the cages by the front doors. A raider came within 10 feet of him, close enough for Bobby to catch the scent of cigarette smoke on his breath. The raider glanced at him, mistaking Bobby for just another walker, and continued on his patrol. Bobby's heart pounded so fiercely in his chest that he was sure the noise would betray him. Just 20 more yards to reach the cages. The walker suit worked as intended, preventing the young walker from noticing Bobby as he approached the cages. However, it did lean slightly towards him, pressing against the bars with a seemingly undead curiosity. Bobby couldn't help but notice its eyes. They followed his form with an oddly intelligent gaze. Bobby discreetly reached into his pocket for his lockpick set, ensuring his actions were concealed beneath the decaying flesh he wore as a disguise. The lock on the cage was basic. The raiders prioritized armed guards over advanced security measures. After a nerve-wracking 3 seconds, the lock clicked open. With the lock undone, he tied a piece of twine to the latch of the young walker's cage, then quickly moved into the adjacent cage. Everything was set. He was in position and ready to unleash the next phase. Ready, Bobby whispered to himself. On the rooftop, upon observing Bobby's success, Harrison and Trevor exchanged a look. This was the critical moment that would decide whether they succeeded or faced a disastrous failure. On my mark, Harrison said. 3, 2, 1. They fired in perfect unison, the improvised silencers reducing the rifle report to something between a cough and a spit. The raider sniper jerked as both rounds found his chest, then toppled backward out of sight. Bobby saw the sniper fall and immediately pulled the rope sharply, releasing the juvenile walker. It burst from the cage at a ferocious speed, immediately turning right and bolting into the mall's entrance where the majority of the raiders were sleeping. The creature moved with terrible purpose, its smaller frame allowing it to accelerate to a speed adult walkers couldn't match. It burst through the entrance, a missile of teeth and hunger. Shouts erupted from inside, a gun fired, then another. The juvenile walker's shriek, higher pitched than an adult's, somehow more primal, cut through the commotion like a blade. Then screams, human screams, lots of screams and panic. It was utter chaos. Bobby pressed himself against the wall, counting in his head. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi. The plan called for him to wait 30 seconds before the next phase. More gunfire inside, frantic shouting. A raider staggered out the entrance, clutching his throat where arterial blood pulsed between his fingers. He collapsed face first onto the concrete. A second raider appeared in the doorway, his rifle raised. Before he could fire, the juvenile walker sprang onto his back, driving him to the ground. Its teeth found the soft flesh where neck met shoulder, tearing away a mouthful. The man's scream became a gurgle. 25 Mississippi, 26 Mississippi. A third raider emerged, firing wildly at the juvenile walker, which had already abandoned its second victim and was scrambling along the floor toward him. Most shots missed. One grazed its shoulder, barely slowing it. It leapt, fastening onto the man's leg. His knees buckled as he continued firing, bullets punching holes in the ceiling. 30 Mississippi. Bobby tapped his leg 3 times in rapid succession, his subliminal signal to himself for Phase 2. Across the parking lot, Archer and others would now be advancing on the south entrance. Inside, the juvenile walker continued its rampage, its movements a blur of predatory efficiency. Unlike the shambling adults, this thing hunted with terrible purpose. They had theorized that the juvenile walker might create enough chaos to draw the guards away from their posts. They hadn't anticipated the raw, visceral terror it would inspire, a terror that spread through the raiders faster than the creature itself could move. Bobby checked his knife, then his shotgun. Phase 3 would begin soon. The real bloodshed was just about to take place. The raiders' disciplined facade broke under the juvenile walker's charge. 3 men fell, while others scattered. Through his scope, Harrison tracked the scarred raider leader, once seen with the suited stranger, who now barked orders in the car park, flanked by 2 bodyguards. Harrison exhaled, squeezed the trigger, and the leader's head jerked back in a spray of crimson. Moments later, Trevor and Anthony fired in unison, taking down the bodyguards as their weapons clattered. The remaining raiders trapped inside the mall were in a state of chaos, but managed to fend off the juvenile walker for a brief period. Meanwhile, at the front gate, the noise had drawn the walkers outside, and hundreds gathered around the makeshift entrance to the car park. The pressure was causing the fence to buckle. On the rooftop, Anthony held a Molotov cocktail, its wick already lit. He aimed at a spot on the fence where the walkers were starting to bend the chain link. Despite his poor throw, which missed the target by a considerable distance, the bottle astonishingly hit the top of the fence, rolled along without breaking, descended down the railing, and finally shattered exactly where he had intended, engulfing dozens of walkers in flames. He laughed out loud to himself. How the fuck did that happen? Even still, the flames spread quickly, igniting dry vegetation and weakening the fence. With a tortured groan, a 20-foot section collapsed, and walkers poured through like water through a broken dam. Dozens, then hundreds, surged forward. As they stumbled through flames, they ignited others, turning into walking torches, advancing toward the mall entrance. Jesus, Trevor breathed through his scope. There must be 300 of them. Inside the mall, chaos erupted as the raiders found themselves trapped in a nightmarish scenario, hemmed in between the relentless young walker and the ravenous horde pressing in from outside. Desperation drove 6 of them to attempt a frantic escape through a side exit, but they were brutally engulfed by the horde and ripped apart. One particularly ferocious raider, fueled by sheer survival instinct, managed to dodge the young walker and skillfully navigate through the undead throng that had flooded into the mall, a glimmer of hope igniting within him as he believed freedom was within reach. But Trevor, a cold sentinel perched on the rooftop, snuffed out that hope with a single merciless shot, ending his life in an instant. It was a fitting end, yet profoundly tragic to witness a man fighting tooth and nail for his life, tasting the sweet tang of victory only to have it ripped away in a heartbeat. As the horde devoured the bodies of the raiders in both the car park and the mall, the juvenile walker was still on the prowl, driven by an insatiable hunger. It exploded through the mall's front doors into the car park, its senses homed in on Anthony's scent from the rooftop. With a ferocious determination, it charged at the brick wall, desperately clawing its way upward, almost reaching the top each time before crashing back to the unforgiving ground. But it was relentless, undeterred by pain or failure. Anthony, Harrison, and Trevor, adrenaline coursing through their veins, quickly decided to use the rooftop barricade as a weapon against the young walker. Harrison, with muscles straining and veins bulging, began to push with all his might, joined by Trevor and Anthony in a concerted effort that felt like a Herculean battle against nature itself. With a primal roar of exertion, they managed to topple a massive portion of the barricade, sending it crashing down onto the juvenile walker, pinning it beneath the heavy debris and a tangled hedge. It was still alive, its grotesque form writhing and snapping, but it was finally trapped. The dead, now both walkers and raiders, were scattered throughout the parking lot, their limbs splayed and expressions empty. Archer moved among them with his crossbow raised, while Nordberg followed with a knife, puncturing brainstems to ensure they would never rise again. Their silence was broken only by the wet sound of blades meeting skulls. The battle was over, though its echoes lingered in the charred mall wing and the moans of trapped walkers. "That's the last of them in this section," Archer said, retrieving a bolt from a walker's eye socket, wiping off trailing strands of gelatinous matter. Nordberg scanned the horizon. "Trevor and Harrison have secured the west exit. Gustav's checking the loading dock." Inside, survivors moved with the efficiency born of routine violence. Carlos drove their vehicle into the cleared lot, his injured head evident, but his face remained impassive. Anthony knelt beside the entrapped juvenile walker that had exhausted itself against the makeshift prison. Unlike typical walkers, it watched every move with a calculating gaze. "I need to secure it for transport," he explained, while laying out some reinforced restraints he'd found near the cages. "Its behavior is evolutionary, if I can figure out what's different. I mean, it's the perfect soldier, isn't it?" Trevor frowned. "You really want to bring that thing back after what it did to those raiders?" "That's why we study it," Anthony replied, his voice laced with scientific curiosity from his pre-apocalypse past. If the young ones are evolving to be smarter and faster, we need to know why, and also why it's only some and not all of them. Despite their unease, the others returned to their tasks, trying to focus on the work at hand. Only Bobby lingered, his fingers wrapped tightly around the handle of his machete. In a fleeting moment of distraction, he moved forward with a stealthy grace, his blade slicing through the air with a deadly gleam. The juvenile walker's head was severed cleanly, its jaws still snapping hungrily as the head rolled onto the ground. When Anthony reappeared just moments later, his initial shock quickly transformed into a mix of anger and weary acceptance. "We couldn't risk it. This thing should not be able to roam around," Bobby stated plainly, wiping the blade with practiced precision. "Some questions just aren't worth the answers." Anthony stared at the detached head, its teeth still clicking, then pulled a canvas bag from his pack. "I can still run tests on the brain," he said, lifting the head by its matted hair and dropping it into the bag. "It's not ideal, but it'll do." Bobby watched impassively as Anthony secured his grisly specimen. Some lines, once crossed, can never be uncrossed. Spread throughout the buildings near the mall, the group discovered a 15 kVA generator, 200 rations, 3 gold bars, 3 Molotov cocktails, 10 fuel drums each holding 20 liters, blood testing equipment, and an anti-material sniper rifle from the lookout on the roof. However, these finds paled in comparison to what they uncovered in what had been the raider leader's office, a converted manager's room that overlooked the parking lot. Anthony and Trevor sorted through the scattered papers. Among inventory lists and patrol schedules, they found a poorly written service contract between the Goon Brigade and the Guardians. Trevor leaned in, his breath catching as he read the document. The contract required the delivery of children aged 12 to 16 with AB-negative blood, in exchange for the right to survive, loot, and plunder anything they encountered. Non-compliance would result in the total eradication of the Goon Brigade. The document was signed by someone named Cyrus Black. Another paper detailed that the children needed to be in good health and free from walker bites or scratches. "Who the hell are the Guardians?" Harrison asked as he joined them. "They must be the organized group that took the kids," Anthony replied. "That would explain the trucks and heavy weapons." He added, "The man in the suit must have been this Cyrus Black." Anthony scrutinized the document with care. "AB negative is very rare. Why would they specifically target that blood type?" "Experiments," Nordberg interjected curtly. "They're conducting experiments on children." Before Anthony could reply, Gustav entered the room visibly disturbed. "I just discovered about 16 dead kids out back near the waste area. There's an incinerator filled with ash and bones next to them. It's horrific," as he recalled the Ramada massacre he was falsely accused of. "Dr. Chesterton," Harrison suddenly said. "He was selecting them by blood type." "Damn," Anthony muttered. "At Emma's diner, when we rescued the survivors headed to Atlanta, the kids Stevie and Bella were chained in the garage. They would have ended up here either dead behind the building or if their blood type was AB negative on a truck to nowhere." Bobby's jaw clenched. "We took out some raiders, but the real monsters are still out there." Trevor, now realizing that if Toby had made it through from Nashville, there is a strong chance he was ambushed, abducted, or even killed. "My son could be out back or on a truck somewhere." Silence filled the room as Bobby placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We'll keep searching," he said calmly. The group was overcome by the weight of this systematic evil. They had seen many horrors after the apocalypse, but the idea of harvesting children for unknown reasons was a new level of depravity. They collected the contract and any other information they could find about these Guardians. Outside, the fire from the corpses in the car park was dying down. Even as smoke continued to rise from the mall roof, trapped walkers would soon burn or escape. Twin Peaks Mall had answered some questions, only to bring up darker ones. Loading into their vehicles, Anthony clutched the bag containing the juvenile walker's head, its teeth still chattering. In this pseudo-stasis, it resembled a child more than a monster. The true monsters, he realized, still wore human faces. They made contracts, conducted experiments, and hunted children with rare blood. As the survivors drove away from the smoldering car park and mall, their victory seemed empty in light of the terrifying new revelations. Smoke rose into the dimming sky, marking another battlefield in an ever-changing war of survival. They couldn't help but wonder whether they should return to completely clear out the mall, repair it and establish a base, or just continue moving on. What was in that medical report, and how did it connect to the juvenile walker? How many more of these creatures were out there? All they knew about the Guardians was that they were seeking children with AB negative blood, and that they were heading southeast. To be continued. Thanks for watching Session 3, Act 1 of our Walking Dead Road to Redemption campaign. Upon the successful capture of the Twin Peaks Mall in Ellijay, the group found the following items: 200 rations of food, 3 gold bars, 3 Molotov cocktails, 115 kVA generator, 10 20-liter fuel drums, 150 caliber sniper rifle, loads of small arms and 2 AR-15 assault rifles, blood testing equipment and 1 6-wheeled utility vehicle with a full tank of fuel. The group found a contract of sorts between the newly deceased Goon Brigade and the Guardians, a well-armed and highly organized military unit. The contract was to deliver young teens with rare blood to them. They discovered a juvenile walker with heightened senses that possessed incredible speed and awareness. They noticed that Daryl Chesterton, who they'd previously rescued in Blue Ridge, was not as friendly as he made out to be. Highlights during the session was Carlos's revenge on Clint and brutal execution. He and Amy have things to work through still, unsure on where that goes. Bobby's incredible infiltration into the mall in the walker suit and then subsequent release of the juvenile walker to start the combat. Gustav's clearing the air by explaining his butcher of Ramada allegations. His leadership, while questioned, seems to be restored, but in more of shared capacity with Trevor. Anthony's disastrous throw with the Molotov cocktail that still ended up going exactly where he intended, and his treatment of the newly decapitated walker, to which he's aptly named Bernie. His scientific mind is running wild with what-ifs. Nordberg's murderous assault on the remaining walkers in the mall car park. The group is unsure what's got into him. He's killing everything and everyone over the last week or so. The group now have to decide on what they do next. Seek out these Guardians, knowing they headed southeast. Rebuild the mall and use it as a new haven, or stay with Emma's diner, or press on to Jasper to Atlanta and drop off Carlos and Amy. Trevor's son could still be out there, and if he is, what's his blood type? Thanks for watching.